Good afternoon, everybody. Right on the dot, 12. I had that perfect. I've been worrying about that all morning that I was going to say morning when it was afternoon. We still have a few people left to join us, so we're just going to spend a couple of minutes waiting for them to jump on. How you going, Glenn? How you going, Linda?
Very good. Very much looking forward to today's conversation. Nice to see some familiar names. Brianna, Gareth, Kate, thank you so much for coming along. Lucy, I hope the little ones are well. Will, Burton, very good to see. Haven't spoken in a little while, but yeah, really excited for today's conversation. And Linda, so thank you so much for coming and joining us today.
Pleasure. Great to be here with you both.
Before we do get into it, what are you up on the weekend? Anything exciting?
Look, the exciting part is catching up with some friends. The less exciting part is the dealing with the flat packs that will be arriving tomorrow. I had a moment of inspiration of redesigning my office. So
Oh,
that is all a project that's about to get underway on the weekend.
what are you building?
Well, I've decided we need to move the bookshelf away from me. I want some new cabinetry and I want like a dresser area.
Okay, all right.
I
So
know.
a
Small
few things going
undertaking.
on.
Exactly, exactly. Clearly, I've spent too much time looking that way, pondering, and I've decided that it all needs to change for the new financial year.
Yeah, new look coming into the 1st of July.
Indeed. And what about you guys?
Friend's birthday on Friday night, which will probably be a pretty big night. So the rest of the weekend will be pretty tame, I imagine. But yeah, looking forward to a bit of downtime on the weekend. Leading into the end of financial year, it's always a bit chaotic with all the last minute things that seeing things that tend to go on. But yeah, so hopefully pretty quiet.
And knowing you, you'd then be going into some planning, I suspect, for the new
Of
financial
course.
year.
Yeah. New year, new you. This is the most exciting time of the year for us finance people.
Yeah, exactly.
Todd, good to have you along, mate. Zach, thanks for joining. Rachel, thank you for joining. Sylvia, lovely to see you as well. It's coming up on 2 past 12, so we might give it another 30 seconds or so, and then Liam, let's kick it off.
Perfect. All right. Let's see. We're up to 18 so far. There are a few more to jump in, but I think they'll be happy to jump in while we're making the introductions. So, hello everyone. My name is Liam. I am your community and marketing lead here at Fox and Hare. So, I am the one to talk to if you have any ideas for future webinars. If there is anything that you would like us to cover or anything that you need help with, please do get in touch. We are your financial advisors, but we are here to help with everything money related. Obviously, today's topic, getting a raise, not exactly in the purview of your financial advisor, but definitely something that is related and something we think is really important. So, as I said, please do let me know if there is a topic that you'd like covered in a future webinar, and I will do my best to make it happen. Also, I think it's worth noting Fox and Hare members, those codes that you receive are also valid for your friends and family. You can pass that code along to your friends, you can pass it along to your family members and share that value around. We don't want only to be the most useful people in the room. We want you to be extremely useful as well. So please do pass those along. Let's get started introducing our guests for today's talk. So we have the one and only Glen Hare, who I'm sure most of you know, if by name only. He is our founder here at Fox and Hare Financial Advice. He was voted Australia's best financial advisor in 2024. He was voted Australia's thought leader of the year in the financial services sector in 2023. And he is featured on the Financial Standards 50 Most Influential Advisors every year since entering the industry just about 8 years ago. We also have Linda Murray on the call. Linda is the founder and executive coach and leadership development expert at Athena Leadership Academy. She is renowned for equipping leaders and emerging professionals with the essential skills for career progression. She's shaped movers and shakers from some of the world's biggest brands, including Samsung, Porsche, and Deloitte. In short, you are in very good hands today, and I am going to hand over to Glenn to get started.
Sweet. Thank you, Liam. And Linda, so excited for today's conversation. I feel like this has been a long time coming. Here at Fox and Hare, we often talk quite regularly with our members around their expenses and how they're managing their cash flow and what to do with their disposable income. What I'm really excited about today is we're pivoting that conversation to, well, how do we generate more income and ensure that we're armed with the questions and the know-how in terms of how to approach those conversations. Uh,
Amazing.
in terms of the framework for today's session, so we've got about 40 to 45 minutes. I definitely do want to keep time at the end of today's session for quick Q&A. However, for those attending, do encourage you any questions throughout the next half an hour or so. Please drop them into the Q&A panel that's at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or just chuck it in the webinar chat, and I'll do my very best to weave that into today's session. In terms of the framework for today, so there's really three key components that we wanted to address, and we wanted to make sure that this was really practical for each and every one of you. So when taking this back to your workplace, you can ensure that there's practical steps in terms of how to position yourself for a raise. The first part of today's conversation is about understanding your value and how to articulate that value. The second will be around preparing your case. So, what are some of the things that you need to be doing behind the scenes for when you inevitably, and the third aspect of the conversation today is actually have that conversation with your manager when asking for a raise. So, Linda, let's start. In terms of understanding your value, I'd love to know. So, if I was working with you at Athena and wanted to understand, how valuable I was to the company that I worked at, what would I actually be measuring and where should I be starting to look?
Yeah, good question. So I think when we think about our value, it's partly what we do. Obviously, we've all got KPIs or key performance indicators that we need to meet, but it's also
Mhm.
about how you show up. So when I look at the value that my team offer, part
Mm,
of it is quantitative measures. So those metrics, in my case with clients, it's like retention or revenue or
mm,
feedback. And then the other part is more qualitative, like how do they influence the organization? What's their attitude? What's their value that they bring in terms of aligning with our values in the
mm.
organization? So there's a few key measures that I can go through with you that sort of sit under those two halves, if you like.
Okay.
That be helpful.
Yeah, do you mind elaborating on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure. So in my organization, so obviously I'm an executive coaching organization and we also have a leadership academy. So we
Yeah.
design and run larger scale leadership programs in corporate. So really, if I'm thinking about the value of the team, it's what's the impact that they've had both on the organization, so tangible outcomes, how have they improved and innovated on our programs, but also what's the impact that they're having with the client. So are we getting great feedback? Are clients rebooking? Is it becoming part of their sort of leadership and development calendar year on year? Are clients responsive? Are they reaching out to me as the leader with positive feedback for the team who are out there delivering? But also, we are a team, right? So, how are we, including me as the leader, sort of lifting the culture? Are they mentoring one another? Are we sharing knowledge? Is it feeling like a place that people want to work and want to stay? All of these parts create value for a person.
Okay. And maybe building upon that, so reflecting on it, I can see a lot of members here that have joined this afternoon either are in leadership roles or are certainly working their way, towards those leadership aspirations. From a leader's perspective, like how do you evaluate an employee's contribution? And I guess picking up on what you just shared, what are some of the key metrics that there's so many metrics. What are some of the metrics that carry the most weight when thinking about value?
Yeah, look, obviously every business is different. So I guess I'd probably start answering this question by encouraging your members to really think like the business owner or
Mm,
like the decision maker if they're working in a very large organization. So I always think about who am I reporting into and what are they measured on?
Mm.
Because at the end of the day, we look good when we make our leaders look good and vice versa. So the sorts of things that leaders or business owners would be thinking about are, what are the business outcomes? Like, what are the actual results, either indirectly or directly, that are linked to that person's work? Or again, that stakeholder satisfaction. What's the feedback that we're getting? Is this person adding to the reputation and brand of the organization?
Mm.
I always think about people, are they coachable? So
Mm.
I think when we're recruiting, one of the mistakes that I see people make all the time is we hire for aptitude skills, but we fire for attitude, right? So what is someone's attitude that they're coming to the organization with? Are they invested? Are they partnering with the organization and willing to learn and grow? And then, as I said, those team dynamics are really important for a leader. We can't have someone that is actually either damaging the team culture or trying to
Mm.
push against it. And then,
Mm.
lucky last, in terms of a key metric, I think is productivity and proactivity. Right. So
Mm.
we're in a world where we're expected to do more with less all the time. So, how are you being productive and improving all the time, but also how are you being proactive in terms of thinking ahead? It's not just what are you delivering today, how are
Mm.
you thinking constantly about how you can be better, how we can be doing things better, and really bringing those ideas and suggestions to the table.
Mm. And thinking about picking up on what you shared from a practical perspective, like understanding what is important to our leaders, would you suggest that you would be comfortable to actually ask the leader like what is important to you, or would it be an expectation that the employee should just know what's important to that leader?
I think it's a really good question. What are you measured on? I even ask my clients. So if I'm going into a new organization and I'm dealing with learning and development, I will say, what are you measured on? So we know what the success of the program is, but
Mm.
how's this going to make you look good? And I can tell from their face, no one else has asked that. But really,
Mm.
if we're partnering together, then that's important. So, same for an employee, you're partnering with your leader, you're
Mm.
partnering with your team and the organization to be successful. So I absolutely think it's another way of framing that would be, help me help you.
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of, I guess, thinking about value, what are some of we've spoken about, how to articulate value. What are some of the areas that we should practically think about? So asking our leaders, what's valuable to them, which we would then take into, I suppose, our day job. What are some common misconceptions employees have about their value and how it's being perceived by the company they work for? How do you kind of bridge the gap between that perceived value and then that understanding?
Yeah, two things that I see a lot of is in terms of the misconceptions. One is tenure. Because I've been here
Mm.
2 years, therefore I deserve a raise or a promotion. And the
Mm.
other is hard work. There's an assumption that if I work really hard, someone's going to notice and say he or she is great. They deserve a raise or they deserve a promotion. We need to break the assumption that leaders have full visibility over the work that we're doing, and hard work doesn't necessarily equate to value. So I think in terms of the value and the impact, we
Mm.
need to be articulating it, and it's also got to be aligned with where the organization is heading and what they're valuing and what they measure. So very much speaking the language of value rather than speaking the language of time or hard work, I think is really important. Connecting the work that you do and the value that you see that you provide really to those business outcomes. So understanding what is important to the business, what's the vision, and how
Yeah.
are you an active contributor towards that. And then, of course, asking for feedback regularly. I think feedback needs to be not some scary annual or biannual review type conversation. We want to be asking and seeking feedback all the time so that that's a two-way conversation with yourself and your leader, because then it's really, again, honing back to those business outcomes and what they want to see and what they value.
Yeah, that's a great call out, and I actually think that's a really nice segue into the second aspect of today's conversation. We've had a good, we're talking a lot about value and understanding value and perceived value and understanding, the gap between what an employee may see as value versus what our leaders may see as value. Picking up on that last comment, Linda, thinking about preparing your case. So you've internally focused and you've had those conversations around that value proposition. We now need to start thinking about, okay, we've got to prepare for that conversation that's inevitably going to come so that we can ask for that pay rise. I'd love to start, unpacking the practicalities around preparing our case for that pay rise. What are some of the best, I guess, best practices for employees to research salary ranges effectively? Like what resources do you recommend when working with your clients as to, what they should be potentially referencing or, what would be relevant for the role that they're in this, the company they're in, etc. Where do you start?
Yeah, first of all, can I just call out that you're talking about preparation? Because again, I see so many people go into these conversations and they just haven't prepped. They're
Yeah.
not ready. They're not thinking commercially. So,
Mm,
in terms of where to research, and because this is what we're really talking about, is how do we build out a business case for the raise that the person's asking for? We want to create this compelling business case that makes it almost difficult for someone to say no because they're like, good point. You're totally worth that increase to the business based on the value that you're adding.
mm,
So some of that research, I guess three key resources that I really like: pay scale is one, and then Hayes salary guide. So Hayes is in the recruiters. They have a great salary guide, especially I'm assuming your members are in Australia. And
yep.
then Robert Half salary guide is another one. So I would go to multiple sources just to see what the market is saying. Something to keep in mind, though, when we're looking, some people go to Seek, for example, when we're looking at how much is my role being paid currently across the industries.
Mm,
Really, we want to do an industry match because what one role will be paid in one industry might be different to what it gets paid in another.
mm,
Experience level is obviously another key thing. Location.
mm,
So average wages in Tasmania are
mm,
probably different to what they are in Sydney, or for a lot of people who've done the sea change or tree change during COVID and
mm,
moved to regional areas. I'm seeing this a lot, is now that the expectation is to come back into the office 5 days. They don't want to
mm,
do that, but then they're kind of having to take roles with a pay cut because they
mm.
live in Wagga, for example. So we need to take all these factors into consideration. I think also the company size is really important too. So what you might get paid in a senior role in a startup will be different to the same role in a multinational like Amazon or Google. And
Yep.
also don't assume that because Amazon or Google are massive, that they're going to pay you more because they're also a sought after logo to have on people's CV, right?
Totally.
Often they can get away with it paying less. So if we're using all these data points to work out what we're worth and what
Mm,
our salary is externally.
mm,
These are all really key things. And two other things that I'd mention. One is be mindful that your job title, if you're not changing roles, but you're just seeking an increase in salary, keep in mind that your job title and what you actually do are probably two different things. And what I mean by that is you
mm,
might have got that role 18 months ago and it was called a senior data analyst or whatever it is. What
mm,
you actually do now is probably different to that. So when you go looking at salary guides, yes, put in your job title, but also research what are all the extra things that you're doing and what else might that role now be called
mm.
in the marketplace, if that makes sense. And then, like Eli, speaking to mentors and recruiters will also offer really good insights as well. And not that you're wanting to jump ship in talking to recruiters, but they're the ones with their finger on the pulse and they
Yeah,
know what organizations are paying.
for sure. So again, what I'm hearing is in terms of preparing for the case, so thinking about going into that conversation with your manager, it's about having clear direction around what your salary expectations are, backed up by research and data and looking at the market more broadly. And I think about my personal journey. I was at Macquarie Bank for 10 years, and they run a similar, I suppose, appraisal cycle that we do here at Fox and Hare. So biannual at the end of the calendar year, and then full review coming into the end of financial year. And something that I did was always being really clear with my managers. Well, this is what my expectation is in 12 months' time. What do I need to do in order to get there? And I was really proactive, ensuring that I was having conversations with my manager, not necessarily every fortnight, but certainly making sure I understood whether they felt that I was on track or not on track. And if I wasn't on track, understood what I needed to do to pivot to enable me to kind of secure that pay rise.
Mm.
Something I didn't do very well, which was document the
Yeah.
accomplishments throughout the year. It was, I certainly went in, I prepared, I thought about some of the things. Some of them were very tangible and easy to qualify. Some of them weren't so much. How do you, like, how do employees document their accomplishments throughout the year? Like, what format would be the most impactful when presenting this information to their managers in that 6 month or 12-month review?
Yeah, I don't know about you. I think we're all busy. I personally don't remember what I did last week, let alone the achievement that my direct report had 6 months ago, right? So in the same way that we're partnering with our leader, is
Mm,
this whole process, it's a campaign, right? I want you to think and your members to really
sure.
think about this as a long-term campaign that we're on, and that we're being collaborative with our leader in this campaign, not combative. People,
Mm,
I think
yeah.
that's part of the fear that comes up with having these salary conversations. So if we're being collaborative, be easy to manage, but also make it easy for your leader to understand what you're doing well.
Mm,
For me, what I do, and I still do this myself, I get my team to do it, I encourage my coaching clients to do it, is
mm,
I have a monthly success spreadsheet. And
mm,
so the first Monday of every month at 8:30 a.m., half an hour is blocked out in my calendar, and that is a non-negotiable time for
mm,
me to reflect on the month that's been and then set my intentions for the month ahead. Right. And in this spreadsheet, I have key metrics or qualities that I want to measure against. So, obviously, if people have certain KPIs, I would definitely include those in there. But other ones might be what are the skills that I want to learn?
mm,
How am I building my network in this next month? Like, who should I be reaching out to? Well-being is another one. How am I making sure I'm working sustainably and looking after ourselves?
mm,
What are the risks that I'm going to have to take, and how am I going to prepare and mitigate those,
mm,
etc. So I plan for the month ahead, and
mm,
then you almost end up with a budget versus actual at that
mm,
next month's meeting, where you go, okay, how did I go in these
mm,
measures? And again, what's my intention? So that's me tracking it for me. But
mm,
then why not say to your manager, hey, look, just so I'm a striver and driver, and I want to achieve great success. And presumably, you've communicated your career aspirations to them. So
mm.
I keep this spreadsheet for myself each month. Would you be open to me sharing it with you? Would that make your life easier? Never in the history of forever has a manager ever said no, thanks. Like,
Yeah.
even if just to be polite, they'll go, sure, that'd be helpful, and they'll file it somewhere. But then
Yeah.
come performance review time, you both have a document of wins that you
Yeah,
can reference,
for sure.
right? And it's got all the tabs there, May, June, August, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Well, and what I think from a manager's perspective that would be really insightful would to see from the employee's perspective, like how do they measure success? Like what are they earmarking as success measures on an ongoing basis, and do they align?
Yeah.
Rather than waiting 12 months to find out, actually there's no alignment there. What business wants and what the employee wants is completely different. If you have that conversation, 12 months prior in the lead up to that annual appraisal, then there's an opportunity to ensure that there is, ongoing continued alignment around both employee and business expectations.
And then these career conversations, salary conversations shouldn't be a surprise for either party,
Yeah.
right? So the leader shouldn't be surprised when you're asking. And then similarly, if you get a yes or no, you shouldn't be that surprised with that outcome because, again, it's a campaign. We're having these conversations consistently.
Yeah. And before kind of going to the third section where we'll start to unpack how to actually have the conversation, we're
Yeah.
still in preparation mode. From a HR perspective, what is the optimal timing from an employee to actually initiate these salary discussions? And I suppose what other factors should they be considering?
So it's really important that employees or your members know the annual performance calendar.
Mm,
Because again, this is a campaign. So we need to know what, from an HR's perspective or from your leader's perspective, whoever the decision maker is,
mm,
where is their head at on any given month? So, for example, let's say I know a lot of my clients are doing their biannual performance reviews now in June.
mm.
June is too late to
Yeah.
be having a salary conversation. In fact, if you work in a large organization, May would also be too late. Those conversations are starting to be had sort of February, March, right?
For-
So leaders are flagged. We've got these coming up in June. Who are we thinking? Keep an eye out for this. Then, if that's in, say, March, by April, they're
yeah.
kind of locking in their decisions to a degree. And then we have our performance review conversations in June. So people who are showing up to a review conversation, putting their hand out for a raise, you've kind of missed the boat,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
I can definitely resonate with that. Even at Fox and Hare, so we 1st of July is when the pay increases go through. But myself and the other co-founder, we're looking at salaries around February, kind of
Mm-hmm.
planning because obviously that change in people's salary come the 1st of July is a significant shift in business financials. So we need to kind of be preparing for that. But my time at Macquarie, we got told in May whether we got a pay rise or a bonus, whatever the case may be. And from my understanding, those conversations were actually back in November.
Yeah, 100%.
Nearly 6 months prior, again, acknowledging that the biggest cost to large organizations is often talent. So they need to be preparing themselves from a financial perspective as to what that looks like.
Yeah, so true. And I think, even, and I know we're going to talk soon about getting into the conversation, but even from a mindset in your preparation, I want people to think about this isn't about negotiating your next salary, although that will be the immediate conversation. Think about negotiating your career. So
Mm,
I encourage your members to really lift their gaze, lift their eye line to the horizon of going, okay, this is where I am now. What's the next role? What's the role after that? And what is going to be strategically smart? So to be able to say to your leader, let's say you come in June, you didn't know any of this information, and for your members, they've got their
mm,
performance review next week. Is you might have missed the boat for a raise this year, although still worth a try. But to really have that conversation about it, I love working here and I want to continue to grow with this organization.
yeah,
What can I do to really be involved in projects that are critical to the organization's future?
yeah,
I want to get visibility, etc. So see how it's a longer game
yeah.
conversation than just the next pay packet.
Yeah. And again, reflecting on personal experience, I've not really had that before. I've not seen that, from the team or again, the team that I looked at in previous life, that proactivity and, really planning for that 12 months ahead. What are some of the red flags though, Linda? Like thinking about timing and timing in a lot of things in life is pretty important. Are there any red flags or inopportune times when an employee should definitely avoid asking for a raise?
Yeah, so good thing that your members now have a raise campaign so
Yeah.
that we're not, because imagine if you had your heart set on this raise and everything was actually going really well, and then the economy changes, or there are always going to be external factors, right? So, this is why we want to be making deposits in the why I should get a raise campaign all throughout the year. But I'd say some inopportune moments, obviously, if there are budget cuts or significant layoffs happening, that is not going to be the best time. Or if you haven't delivered results, like sometimes we just need to be honest with ourselves. Yes, the mortgage payments might have gone up. Yes, they want to invest more and get more advice from Fox and Hare. But if we haven't been delivering results, then I'd focus my attention there. Right after a major mistake, I probably wouldn't put my hand out at that point. And then I think within 12 months of receiving a raise or a promotion, is cheeky to be putting your hand out for another raise, although I don't think we should stop having the campaign conversation.
Oh.
Right. So I think let's keep it live, but don't assume that just because the clock has ticked over, again, that tenure based assumption, just because the clock's ticked over 12 months doesn't mean that it's time for your salary to increase.
Yeah, for sure. And so we've understood our value. So we've reflected internally and had a conversation around what is value. We're building our campaign. We're preparing our case. The time inevitably comes where we have to have the conversation. What is the most effective way for an employer to actually initiate what might feel like an uncomfortable conversation about a raise with their manager? And are there any, I guess, strategies that you recommend when working with your clients as to how best to approach it?
100%. And can I put a little tab off to the side here, which is we sometimes feel like, well, often people feel like this is an uncomfortable conversation, and so we put it off. It feels a bit cringe. What if I get rejected, etc.? I really encourage people to dive into what that feeling is. Like, what am I feeling? What am I fearing? What are the voices in my head telling me? Because if you, like any conversation, if you're coming in awkward, that energy is palpable, right? So what do I actually need to deal with? At the end of the day, I'm having a performance conversation where I'm talking about my worth, which I absolutely strongly believe I have, and I've got the evidence to back it up. So it shouldn't be awkward.
Yeah.
So that's to the side. That's a little bit of navel gazing and self-reflection for people to do. In terms of the structure or the process for creating these conversations, I would schedule a formal conversation and give your manager a heads up about the topic. So we don't want to surprise them. Yeah. So I would do this via email, first of all, and say, hey, I'd love to set up a time to talk about my role, my contributions, my career growth, and also compensation.
Yeah.
When would be a good time in the next week or so for us to have that conversation?
Yeah.
Then that gives you time, if you haven't already, to really build that business case. So that's collecting your examples of achievements. It's that commercial impact that we spoke about at the start. How have you contributed to improving the business through revenue, client retention, new services, better systems? There's so many ways that we can demonstrate that. And then when you're in the meeting, I would lead with impact, like kind of without being, you want to be collaborative, as I say, not combative, and we don't want to feel like we're coming in overpowerful, but I would be ready to have the conversation and be ready to lead with results. Like, as you know, I've been working on this project for the past 10 months and have been integral in it, increasing, revenue by 10 times or whatever it is. Specifically, here's what I did. We're bringing in the data, those quantitative and qualitative measures. This is the difference that it made to the team. Here's the feedback that I've been receiving from clients. There's the qualitative measures there. So, you're shaping the conversation, and also go into this conversation with the campaign in mind. Don't expect this to be the first and last conversation.
Yeah.
It's not like you're going to say, so therefore I think I deserve X. And they'll say, great, I was waiting for you to ask. Actually, let's double it.
Yeah.
This is the first date on this topic.
Yeah, I think that's really relevant, and also giving the manager, I think, the time to prepare for that conversation as opposed to kind of springing it on them in a catch up is also would result in a much more efficient, effective outcome, I would suggest.
And can I just add to that too? What often happens, like we meet with our leaders, say weekly, to talk about WIP meetings, work in progress or tracking project updates, etc. So because we're kind of in that, we're match fit at those sorts of conversations. It's really easy when you get into this one-on-one for a leader to go, yeah, happy to talk about that. Before we do, can you just update me on that project? Is again, control the conversation. Say, love to, we'll definitely make sure there's time for that at the end of this conversation. Can we just focus, first of all, on what it is that we're here to talk about?
Yeah, love that.
What happens? There's always time for the WIP conversation at the end, but there's not always time for the career conversation. In the meantime, you're getting more nervous and concentrating. So stick to the agenda.
Yeah, great. Linda, Gareth has sent through a couple of questions. The first is around financial impact. So the question is in line with if the conversation potentially doesn't go as expected, which we'll address in a moment. So relevant for this conversation, Gareth also asked, could you dive deeper into that raise campaign spreadsheet? It sounded like it was an event achievement X, the KPIs of the team. I think this is really relevant for, where we're having the conversation, and you've mentioned the spreadsheet as kind of a resource. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Like, would we be sending the spreadsheet through prior to the conversation, or should we hold off and then discuss it in the actual meeting? Is it in terms of the benchmarks, like the budgeted versus actual? How do we get kind of buy-in on the budgeted? Is it simply just an employee's KPIs or the team's KPIs in its simplest form?
So I would say, and when I say budget versus actual, I'm kind of using financial language for a behavior-based comparison, if you like. Or sometimes it would be budget versus actual. So the spreadsheet is for you first and foremost, right? So this is you tracking your own success, you setting intentions, because we know when we set goals, we aim higher. Basically, we achieve more than just wafting through month to month, and then before you know it's end of financial year again. So really, I'm sure you go through this with your members, is they're tracking how they're traveling with their financial management. This is exactly the same for your professional management, right? So your personal KPIs are absolutely part of this spreadsheet, rather than it just being something that we check in on in preparation for a review. Is to say, okay, well, let's say one of my annual KPIs is that I, increase my team revenue by X percent. Don't wait, right? So if I need to do that over the course of this year, what would each quarter look like? And therefore, what activity am I going to do this month? What output to get to that outcome? So it's not just in the spreadsheet tracking the outcomes, it's actually setting intention and therefore tracking the activity that we're doing to progress towards those outcomes. So you'll have KPIs in there, but as I said, it's also like, how am I being a better operator? How am I building out my network? Who would be adding greater value to the organization who I don't really know, or I haven't seen them for years? Great, I'm going to catch up with them for a coffee this month. That goes in the spreadsheet. What do I need to learn in order for me to continue to be great value for this organization? What am I seeing are the skill sets that they're going to need in the future? Because at the end of the day, if they can pay you to be doing those skills rather than employing an additional resource to bring that skill set into the organization, that's a plus, right?
Totally, yeah.
So all forms part of your campaign around currency.
Yeah. And so we're having the conversation. What are some of the mistakes employees make when articulating their reason for the raise? So they're in the room, they're having the conversation. What are some of the mistakes they're making when specifically articulating the reason for that raise? And I suppose building upon that, how can they, frame their request more persuasively?
I think a fail is to frame it emotionally like, I need more money because my rent went up. so sad, too bad.
Yeah.
Really at the end of the day, that isn't a problem of the organization. That's a problem of you, of the individual, that you need to
Mm.
solve, and that's a problem. But how can I make sure the organization has value, like that I'm demonstrating the value so that my wage goes up, so that I can pay the rent or the mortgage increase, for example.
Mm.
Overgeneralizing is another one. I've worked really hard for a long time. Again, great. We all do.
Mm.
What's articulate the value that your hard work has offered, and then even comparison. So other people are making more than me.
Mm.
In some organizations, even knowing what other people are earning can be a fireable offense based on some contracts. So that is definitely not
Mm.
a conversation that I would be raising. But also, again, that's fine. There will always be people who are earning more or less than you. What's the value comparison? What's the impact that they're having that you're not? And if you believe that you have the same level of impact or that you're adding greater value to the organization, absolutely have that conversation. Because
Mm.
at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is return on investment.
For sure. Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
going to cost the organization however many thousand more, how are you demonstrating that you're adding way more value than what you're asking for?
Yeah. And I'd actually love to get some thoughts from those that are dialing in, just in terms of some potentially some common objections that their managers have actually raised during those salary negotiations. So if anyone online has particular objections that they've received, feel free to drop them in the chat. But maybe Linda, from your perspective, thinking about it from I guess a HR perspective, what are some of the common objectives you've heard managers kind of raise during salary negotiations, and how would an employee best prepare to address those? Trying to anticipate those objections.
Yeah, so budget is a big one, right? So if imagine in a large organization, each team is allocated a certain budget for salaries. And so how much is in the bucket,
Mhm.
basically? So the fact that there's no budget right now is one we hear a lot. It's not the right time in the performance cycle. You're already being paid competitively.
Mm.
You haven't been in the role for long enough. These
Mm.
are the sorts of things that we hear. And I would say, based on those responses, I would prepare to hear all of those. It's like, remember when you did an exam, you're like, oh my goodness, I really hope they don't ask this question. And
Yeah.
what question always got asked? That one. So
Yeah.
I would preempt a no and have my responses ready. And when we do get a no, don't be perturbed about that. Remember, this is a campaign. This is not a one-off conversation. A no now doesn't mean a no forever. And also just acknowledge what you've heard from your leader. So if they say it's out of, this is not in the performance review calendar, is say, okay, so what I'm hearing is budget cycles are fixed and I might have missed that opportunity. Can you tell me what is the calendar for
Yeah.
these sorts of situations so that I know for future? Or if you want to understand more about why they're saying no, is can you help me understand what I need to do to deliver the value that would make a raise possible in the future? Like, I want to partner with you on this decision. And leader, I would really love that when we do get to the point of me getting a raise,
Mm.
that you feel positive about increasing. I want it to be a good decision that we're both happy about. Another thing that I would think about, just one more on that whole piece about if you get a no, is I think very much in terms of currencies. In other
Mm.
words, the different ways that we get paid, or the different ways that our value is appreciated, if you like. So money is one of them. Think
Mm.
about what else makes you feel valued in your role or by that organization. So it could be working with great people. It could
Mm.
be flexibility and the opportunity to work from home or days in lieu. It
Mm.
could be working on exciting, significant projects. It
Mm.
could be working in an organization that does something really meaningful. I was with Sydney Uni last week, working with people who are doing research on brain treatments.
Mm.
That has meaning. That really has purpose. So what are these other things that make you feel valued, and how can you bring those into the conversation if money itself is not available right now or just yet?
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good call out. And actually, we're getting a couple of questions come through, and I'm mindful of time, so we'll round out today's conversation in the next 5 or 10 minutes. Well, there was a question that came through around what percentage you should be asking for when asking for a pay rise, and there was acknowledgement that this would vary based on role, sector, things like that, but. Is there a range that is acceptable, or what does that look like, Linda?
I I wouldn't have a set percentage in mind. I would think about this business case that you've created. And then
Mm,
they say, whatever, suggest a figure that feels nearly right and then add tax. I like
mm,
that saying. What I say to clients is think about what you think you're worth and then
mm.
add some to the point where you just get a little bit of vomit coming up, like where it literally makes you feel a little bit sick at the thought of asking. And here's why, because it's a negotiation. So
Yeah.
you want to provide a range and go high on the assumption that you will get talked down a little bit. But also, you think you're negotiating for the value that you perceive that you're adding right now.
Mm,
Chances are your next salary negotiation might be in a year or 18 months. So if it feels right now, it's going to feel really undervalued in about 6 months, let alone in 18 months. So I want
mm,
you to think about negotiating for the wage that you're going to enjoy receiving in sort
mm.
of 6, 9, 12 months, not
Yeah.
just what would make do now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good call out. And I think building upon that again, another question, similar kind of line of thinking, but if the business, and this was a question that came through from Gareth, if we're asking for a pay rise and it's not even meeting kind of normal inflation, so it's having an impact on us kind of personally, like if our pay isn't going up in line with inflation, there's a strong argument that your actual real pay is going backwards.
Mm.
Do you stick around and try and continue with the campaign, or is that the time where you go, actually, what, the business isn't really valuing what I'm putting forward. It's probably time to start looking.
I think if you've got to fit your own oxygen mask as well, as they say. I
Hmm.
would say if you have done the campaign, if you've been having regular conversations about your career, your aspirations, the value you add, this is maybe your second go at having a salary conversation, then yes, I think you need to potentially look elsewhere. But I wouldn't not prepare, have a salary conversation, get a no, and say, oh,
Hmm.
I've been working hard. I deserve a raise, so I'm going to look elsewhere.
Hmm.
Make sure you've done everything you can, assuming you enjoy the culture and where you work.
Hmm.
Make sure you've done everything you can in your campaign to make it clear why you want it, but also what do I need to deliver in order to get it? And can we have that conversation again in whatever, 6 months? And can I check in with you again in 3 months to
Hmm.
make sure that we're on track?
Hmm.
Do all those things and are getting yes, 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 everything's great. And then
Hmm.
at the 6 month mark, they say no for the second or third time. That
Hmm.
might be a cue to start looking elsewhere.
For sure. Linda, thank you so much for today's
Oh, pleasure.
conversation. The key takeout for me was very much that collaborative approach. This shouldn't be a one-off conversation on an annual basis. Understand your value, understand what you're contributing to the business, understand what your key metrics that your leader or your manager is looking at. Understand what theirs are, so you can support them in driving towards theirs. Prepare your case, prepare the campaign. Don't allow this to be a one-off conversation, but work again in that collaborative approach to ensure that there is the best outcome on both sides, both for the business and the employee, and then inevitably have the conversation.
Yeah, and making sure that that value that you've identified, that you're communicating that regularly and seeking opportunities to make people aware of that. It's one thing you knowing the value in your head. If other people don't realize what you're doing,
Yeah.
then that will get missed.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Linda.
Oh, thank
For the
you.
Fox and Hare members that have joined us this afternoon, there is a quick survey. It'll take you about 30 seconds to complete. Really keen for your keen feedback. And also, as Liam mentioned at the outset of today's conversation, if there are other topics that you would like for us to address, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to support you in any way we can. Thank you, Linda. Have a lovely afternoon, and we will
Thank you,
chat
Glenn.
soon.
Thank you, Liam. Thank you, members.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.